Morning to all of you from Berkeley, California. On behalf of Dharma College, Richard and myself would like to warmly welcome you into our second Dharma talk. On this auspicious occasion of Vesak, this month we're celebrating Vesak. We're very honored and very touched to have Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi joining us again. Many of you have had the great chance to hear from Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi through the Abhidhamma teachings that he is giving us, and it will continue again in July. So those of you who are interested in continuing, I will leave in the chat box a way for you to reconnect with the continuation of the Abhidhamma teachings. But for today, I asked Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi if it was possible to do a Dhamma talk, especially for our Dharma brothers and sisters in India. Typically, we hold the Tipitaka chanting ceremony at the Seat of Enlightenment in December. And because of the COVID situation, we were not able to perform that. And instead, it was an idea to bring some of these great elders to share in the Dhamma, especially as we honor this auspicious month of May. And so Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi agreed to give a talk, and the talk title is a beautiful title, The Wondrous Manifestation of Tathagata. So we all look forward to that. But before we begin, I'd like to just share a little bit about Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, because some of you may be new to this program. And so I'd like to just formally welcome Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi is an American Buddhist monk from New York City. He was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1944, and he obtained a BA in philosophy from Brooklyn College and a PhD in philosophy from Claremont Graduate School in 1972. Drawn to Buddhism in his early 20s, after completing his university studies, he traveled to Sri Lanka, where he received novice ordination in 1972 and full ordination in 1973, both under the late Venerable Ananda Maitreya, the leading Sri Lankan scholar monk of recent times. He was also appointed the editor of the Buddhist Publication Society in Sri Lanka in 1984 and its president in 1988. Venerable Bodhi has many important publications, as many of you know. He is the author, translator, editor, including translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Connected Discourses of the Buddha, a new translation of the Samyutta Nikaya, and In the Buddha's Words in 2005. We're so fortunate to have Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations of the Pali Sutras. They're just wonderful, and if you don't know them, please go and find a way to connect to these incredible translations. In May 2000, he gave the keynote address at the United Nations on its first official celebration of Vesak. And he returned in the US in 2002, and he currently resides at the Chong Yen Monastery and teaches there at the Bodhi Monastery. So a warm good morning to you all on the West Coast. We're still morning time, East Coast, and those of you in Asia, very warm welcome from Dharma College. And so now I'd like to...
One more. Could I just make a request?
Yes.
Before Bhante speaks, questions.
Yes. So just to say that for those of you who have any questions during the talk, Richard will assist me in actually bringing together the questions. So if there are questions, please put them in the chat box and he will direct them to Bhante. We warmly welcome you all into this program, and now would like to ask Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi to begin wise reflections on this wonderful talk entitled The Wondrous Manifestation of Tathagata.
Okay, first I would like to thank Wang Mo and Richard for inviting me to give this talk through Dharma College. And I understand that there will be people from India joining this talk. And I really want to extend to them my deepest concern for their well-being and safety. Every day I'm following the news about the spread of the coronavirus throughout India, and I have to say it's really shocking and horrible what has been taking place. And I really deeply hope that everybody who is participating in this call, and even their family members, community members, that everybody will observe with utmost rigor all of the protocol necessary to maintain their safety and their health. And I hope that the vaccination process will spread quickly throughout India and will protect the people of the country from the ravages of the COVID pandemic. I want to start in the traditional way with the line of salutation to the Buddha. If you know that line, then you can join me with your microphones turned off. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Yeah, I'm going to base this talk on two suttas or discourses that are found in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses of the Buddha, which I recently examined and expounded in my Saturday morning sutta study class. So I see that there are some people joining this call who also participate in my Saturday class. And so if what they're going to hear today sounds familiar, it's because these are the suttas that we recently studied together in the Saturday class. So this is Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, suttas number 127 and 128. Both suttas deal with four wonderful and amazing things that take place when the Tathagata, that's the Buddha, appears in the world. But the two suttas, when they're viewed together in juxtaposition, they set up an interesting contrast between the types of things that followers of the Buddha would consider important. And it seems to me that the two suttas are intended for disciples of different temperaments, of different characters, or different ways of approaching the Dhamma. The four wonderful and amazing things mentioned in Sutta number 127, it seems to me, are intended primarily for disciples of what we call the Saddha Charita, that is, whose minds or temperament is predominantly motivated by faith and devotion, whereas the four wonderful and amazing things mentioned in Sutta number 128 are intended primarily for disciples who are of what's called the Buddhi Charita, that is, whose minds are primarily governed by wisdom, by investigation and understanding. Okay, so first we'll explain the four things mentioned in 127, then the four things mentioned in Sutta 128. Okay, so Sutta 127 begins by mentioning the first wonderful and amazing thing that takes place with the manifestation of a Buddha in the world. So the text says that when the Bodhisattva passes away from the Tusita heaven and enters his mother's womb, he does so first with mindfulness and with clear comprehension. And when he enters the mother's womb, then just at that moment, a measureless, glorious radiance appears in the world that surpasses the divine majesty of the gods, of the devas. To what extent would one should take this with 100%, in 100% literal way, that I don't know. Whether this measureless, glorious radiance appears in the world. And I've sometimes asked whether people at that time throughout India would perceive that radiance. If everybody in India perceives it, how about people in Greece, in Rome, in Europe, in the Americas, in Africa, in China, Japan, Russia? I don't know. But I think we could see this statement as highlighting the deep spiritual significance of the event that's going to unfold through the maturation of the Bodhisattva and his ultimate attainment. And there's a tendency now amongst Western scholars who come to Buddhism primarily from a scientific and materialistic perspective to kind of reduce the status of the Buddha, even if they respect the Buddha, but they will regard him as a great human teacher of ethics and of wisdom, but nothing more than that. Just a human being who happened to be outstanding in his capacity for moral judgment and wise understanding of the truths of human life. But from a classical Buddhist perspective, even the conception of the Buddha in his mother's womb was not an ordinary biological event, not just the conception of an ordinary being in the womb. Because from the traditional classical Buddhist perspective, we see the arising of the Buddha to unfold against a vast cosmic background in which beings pass away and take rebirth in accordance with their karma. And so the arising of the Bodhisattva in the world in his last existence is the end product of a long process of spiritual cultivation that has taken place over vast aeons of cosmic time. And according to virtually all Buddhist traditions, the sort of final stage of the Bodhisattva's career took place some incalculable aeons in the past, when he was a young man by the name of Sumedha, whose parents had passed away in his youth. And he came from a wealthy family, I believe it was a Brahmin family, and he inherited the great wealth of his parents. But he reflected on that wealth and realized that worldly wealth can provide maybe well-being and pleasure for 80 or 90 years at most, and then one has to die and move on elsewhere, and one can't take the wealth with one. And so as a young man, maybe in his early 20s, he relinquished all of that wealth, dividing it up amongst his relatives, and he became an ascetic. And he went off into seclusion in the forest, practiced meditation, attained the 8 meditative absorptions and various spiritual powers, and passed his day, living in seclusion and enjoying the higher exalted states of consciousness, of meditation. But one day, as he went into the town to collect alms, he saw that the entire city had been decorated with flowers and with candles burning, lamps set up, and people were decorating the city and paving the road. And he inquired from some of the city people, what is taking place? What's going on? And he said to him, don't you know? A Buddha has arisen in the world, a Buddha by the name of Dipankara, and he is going to be coming to visit our city this day. And so we've decorated the city, and now we're paving the road to prepare it for when the Buddha, together with his community of monks, enters the city. And then the thought came to Dipankara, the thought came to the ascetic Sumedha, let me also contribute my share to this great celebration. And he asked, can I help to pave the road? And they said, certainly. And they assigned him a stretch of the road. And as he was helping to pave the muddy road, suddenly he looks up and he sees that the Buddha is walking down the road, the muddy road, together with a great company of monks. And when he comes close to Sumedha, in order to prevent the Buddha from getting his feet muddied, he stretches his body out on the road, covering the muddy pool, and he invites the Buddha and the monks to walk over his own body. And while he's lying there looking up at the Buddha, the thought occurs to his mind. He's so impressed by the majesty, the glory of the Buddha. He realizes that if he wanted to, he could listen to the Buddha's teaching and attain arhatship, liberation in that life itself. But he's so impressed by the great spiritual majesty of the Buddha that he forms in his mind the wish, the aspiration, may I myself become a Buddha in the future, attain the supreme enlightenment, and lead countless human beings and even devas to the bliss of liberation. And so he forms that aspiration, that resolution strongly in his mind and invites the Buddha to walk over him. But the Buddha stops in front of him and looks down at him and reads his mind. And he knows that this ascetic lying in the mud has formed the aspiration to become a Buddha. And then he asks himself, the Buddha asks himself, will that wish be fulfilled in the future? And as soon as that question comes into his mind, he realizes the answer. He realizes that indeed that aspiration will be fulfilled after 4 incalculable aeons and 100,000 great aeons, and that this ascetic Sumedha will become a Buddha known as Gautama or Shakyamuni. And then he understands other things about the future Buddha Gautama. And then he turns to his assembly and he points down to the ascetic and he says, do you see this ascetic lying at my feet? In the future, this ascetic will become the Buddha named Gautama. And then all of them, instead of walking over the body of the ascetic Sumedha, they walk around it and proceed on their way. And then after the whole assembly has passed by the ascetic Sumedha, Sumedha sits up and begins reflecting what are the requirements to become a Buddha. And then based on the Pali sources, he realizes to attain Buddhahood, he has to fulfill 10 qualities, which we call the paramitas or paramis. So these are the virtues of giving or generosity, virtuous conduct, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, determination, loving kindness, and equanimity. And then having brought those 10 qualities to mind, he makes the determination in life after life to practice those 10 qualities, starting with them in their most elementary form and through gradual cultivation to bring them to fulfillment. And so from life after life, over 4 incalculable aeons and 100,000 minor aeons, the Bodhisattva practices these 10 paramitas. In one life, he'll be fulfilling generosity. Another life, maybe renunciation. Another life, developing his deep meditation. Another life, fulfilling patience. Another life, practicing loving kindness, and so on. And so as he goes through this entire process, life after life, he's bringing these qualities, starting from the little stage of being just seeds or sprouts until each of them becomes like a mighty oak tree. And so they all come to fulfillment in the character of the Bodhisattva until his mind becomes like a perfectly shaped diamond with 10 facets, each facet representing one of the paramitas, which are now fully integrated into his character. And so that's the character that he brings with him into his next to last birth, which takes place in the Tusita heaven, one of the heavens of the sense sphere realm. And he remains in the Tusita heaven until all of the conditions in the human realm on earth are appropriate for him to descend and to start his last existence, the existence in which he will attain Buddhahood. And so at a certain point, when all of those conditions have come together, then from the Tusita heaven, he looks down into the human realm on earth, and he realizes, now is the time for me to descend into the mother's womb and to begin my last existence. And so preserving his mindfulness and his sampajanya, his clear comprehension, he leaves the Tusita heaven and enters the mother's womb. And so since in so many millions upon lifetimes, he's generated that great mass of merits and of wisdom, when he enters the mother's womb, then through the power of that merit and wisdom, through the power of his paramitas, this great glorious radiance appears in the world. So that is the first wonderful and amazing thing that takes place with the manifestation of the Tathagata. Okay, the second wonderful and amazing thing that takes place is when the Bodhisattva emerges from his mother's womb. That is, after 10 months, he emerges, comes out from his mother's womb and takes physical birth. And his mother was the Queen Mahamaya, the wife of King Suddhodana, the ruler of the Sakyan state. And so when his mother realized that the time for her to give birth had approached, then she wanted to go to her family home in the state of Devadaha, which is right next to the Sakyan Republic. And so she set out with her entourage from the Sakyan state to the Kolian state, a traditional homeland. And while she was on this journey, when they reached the Lumbini Grove, then she felt the birth pangs come upon her. And so she reached up and took hold of the branch of a tree, and then she gave birth to the Bodhisattva, who emerged from his mother's womb, again with mindfulness and clear comprehension. But according to the text, and this is maybe a matter of faith, this was not like the birth of an ordinary baby who comes out completely mute and helpless, but it said that when the Bodhisattva emerged from his mother's womb, then some of the deities from the Brahma world received him, and they passed him on to other devas, who passed him on finally to the human beings who received him and held him up before his mother. But right after he was born, when he was placed on the ground, he didn't just lie there helplessly, but it's said that he stood on his feet and he took 7 steps, I think, to the north. And then with one hand, he pointed upwards to the heavens. With the other hand, he pointed down to the earth. And he said, in this world with its heavens above and the earth below, I am the foremost in the world. I am the most honored one. I will become the fully enlightened one. This is my last existence. There is no further rebirth beyond this. Then I assume he became like an ordinary baby. Okay, it's said that when the little baby was brought back to the capital city of the Sakyans, Kapilavastu, his father wanted to find the future destiny of the little baby. And so he showed him to the court Brahmins, who are supposed to be skilled in examining the signs of the body and foretelling the future. And there were 7 Brahmins, and they looked at him, and 6 of them held up 2 fingers, but one of them held up 1 finger. And so the ruler, Suddhodana, was puzzled by this, and he asked the Brahmins, what is the meaning of this? Those who held up 2 fingers said that from what we could see from the signs of the baby, there are 2 future destinations for this child, one of 2 future destinations. If he remains in the household, then he will become a Chakravarti Raja, a wheel-turning king who will extend his rule over the entire world. But if he becomes acquainted with the sufferings of life, he'll renounce the household life, become an ascetic, and become a supremely enlightened Buddha who will expound the liberating Dharma to the world. So those were the 2 alternatives held up by 6 of the Brahmins. But the 7th Brahmin held up just 1 finger. And that Brahmin said, so far as I can see, there is only one destination for this baby. He will become, undoubtedly, he will become a fully enlightened Buddha who will expound the Dhamma in the world. Okay, so this is the second wonderful and amazing thing that happens with the manifestation of the Tathagata in the world. Okay, the third wonderful and amazing thing that takes place is that when the Tathagata attains the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment, in that case too, a measureless, glorious radiance becomes manifest in the world. So why should this wonderful, glorious radiance become manifest in the world with the attainment of the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment? And that is because the enlightenment of the Buddha was not just like the enlightenment of an individual being who attains enlightenment for himself, for his own liberation. But the special mission of a Buddha, the special function of a Buddha, is to attain enlightenment, to fully awaken to the Dharma in its full range and all of its dimensions during a period when the liberating Dharma has disappeared in the world. It's said that the Dhamma goes through different stages of development. There will come a period when a Buddha appears in the world, discovers the Dharma, proclaims it, and establishes many, many beings on the path to liberation and leads them to the fruits of liberation. But then, as time goes by, the Dhamma gradually becomes diluted, weakened, starts to lose its power, its potency. And then there comes finally a time when the Dhamma completely disappears, and then an age of spiritual darkness sets in. During that age of spiritual darkness, there will be beings who on their own discover the liberating truth and gain liberation for themselves and maybe a few people that they teach. These are the type of beings that we call Pacceka Buddhas, or in Sanskrit, Pratyeka Buddhas, individually enlightened ones. But their ability to teach is very limited, and so they don't make the attempt to establish the Dhamma, the kind of kingdom of the Dhamma in the world. So the special function of a fully enlightened Buddha, the function, the task for which he's prepared himself over these many aeons, is to arrive at that anuttara sammasambodhi, that unsurpassed perfect enlightenment through which he can fully understand all the different dimensions of the liberating truth and gain the specific skills necessary to be able to teach and guide people of so many different inclinations, temperaments, ways of understanding, and so forth. So it is the Buddha who, in this age of spiritual darkness, in which the Dhamma, the liberating Dhamma, is not known, discovers that Dhamma, fully penetrates it, fully absorbs it. And that's why it takes him some 49 days to remain in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, though he might fully penetrate the liberating truth in one night, but to fully absorb that truth and explore all of its different aspects, it takes somewhere in the range of like 49 days, according to the traditional Buddhist texts. But on that night of the enlightenment, first, the Buddha has to vanquish the armies of Mara, who we could maybe regard as a representation of a kind of visible representation of all the obstructive forces of the mind that keep one in bondage. So Mara challenges the Buddha, or the Bodhisattva, as he's sitting under the Bodhi tree. He unleashes his armies to try to frighten him away. He tries to tempt him with the forms of beautiful maidens. He tries to entice him with the promise of kingship over the earth. But in each case, the Bodhisattva refuses to budge. And finally, Mara says to him, "What right do you have to be sitting here? This world belongs to me, and I command you, depart from this place." But when Mara says this, then the Bodhisattva reaches down with his hand and touches the earth and says, over countless lives, I have fulfilled the 10 paramitas. That is what confers on me the right to be sitting here. Then Mara says, do you have any witnesses to that? And the Bodhisattva says, he looks around, he says, sees that there's nobody on his side. Mara has all of his troops saying, get away, get away, get away. But the Bodhisattva is all alone. And so he reaches his hand down and touches the earth and says, the earth will be my witness. And then the goddess of the earth comes up and says, I bear testimony that this being sitting here has fulfilled the paramitas over millions of lives, and he has fulfilled all of the requisites for Buddhahood. So that entitles him to remain here. And with this, Mara's troops are dispelled, and then the Bodhisattva enters first into the 4 meditative absorptions, and then with his mind fully tamed, calmed, concentrated, collected, free of the ripples of defilements. In the first watch of the night, he recollects his past lives over many, many existences. In the middle watch of the night, he gains the divine eye by which he could see the workings of the law of karma, how beings pass away and take rebirth in accordance with their actions. And then in the last watch of the night, he penetrates dependent origination and the 4 noble truths. He eradicates all of the defilements that keep the mind in bondage, and he pulls away the subtlest layer of obstruction, what is called the obstruction to omniscience. And so when he emerges at dawn, at the break of dawn, or when dawn comes, he emerges as a fully enlightened Buddha whose knowledge can penetrate the entire Dharma Dhatu, the entire realm of phenomena. Okay, but after he penetrates the ultimate truth, he still has to spend time gradually absorbing and assimilating that truth until he's ready to begin his mission. Okay, when he has fully absorbed the truth, fully penetrated the Dhamma in all of its different ramifications, then the question comes to his mind, should I go forth and teach the Dhamma? And it seems a bit puzzling. Why should that question occur to the Buddha's mind when, according to the text, he spent so many lives for the purpose of becoming a Buddha, just so that he could expound the Dhamma to the world? But now that he's fully realized the Dhamma, the question comes, should I go forth and start teaching others? And then he looks, sort of surveys the world and see how, it's almost like he turns on a news report today. Like if I go onto the PBS NewsHour, I see report turmoil in Jerusalem, conflicts between Jews and Palestinians, the United States, people, gun violence, killing people here, killing there. India, Kumbh Mela takes place and people gather in thousands, maybe millions of people gather in the midst of a pandemic, and they're warned, don't gather in groups, but they still defy the authorities. He sees turmoil in Myanmar, trouble in Central America. He sees attempts of strongmen to establish authoritarian governments. So he turns on the evening news with his mind and thinks, wow, how am I going to teach the Dhamma that goes against greed, hatred, and delusion in a world in which there's so much turmoil driven by greed, hatred, and delusion? And then he thinks, I can remain quietly in the forest, pass my days enjoying the bliss of liberation, and then just enter final nirvana. So let me just choose that option rather than go out and teach. But when that thought occurs to him, then it's said that one of the high deities named Brahma Sahampati comes down from the Brahma world, from one of the divine realms, appears in front of the Buddha and pleads with him, saying, Bhante, don't take that alternatives. Please, Bhante, the world is immersed in suffering and misery, and you are the one who knows the way to liberation. You are the one, from your great compassion, you made that vow to attain Buddhahood, to liberate the world. Don't turn away. This is the time for you to go forth and teach. And so with many ways, he pleads with the Buddha. And then the Buddha again looks out at the world using his deep, penetrative knowledge, and he sees that beings are like lotus flowers in a lotus pond. Some lotus flowers grow up in the pond and they blossom in the pond and they never rise up. Other lotus flowers rise up close to the surface. They blossom close to the surface, but they never break the surface. But there are other lotus flowers. The buds come up to the surface and they wait only for the sun to rise and shed its light upon the pond. And when the sunlight sheds its light on the pond, then those buds will open up and reveal the glory, the splendor of their lotus flowers to the world. And so the Buddha saw that there are people who are like that third kind of lotus flower. They too have practiced paramitas over past lives. They too have great merits and great wisdom, and they need only the teaching of the Dhamma to blossom and attain the fruits of liberation. And so when the Buddha sees this, then he makes the decision to go forth and teach the Dhamma. And so gradually he proceeds little by little from Bodh Gaya, what is now called Bodh Gaya, the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, to the deer park in what is now Sanat, near Benares. And there were residing the 5 ascetics who had waited upon the Bodhisattva when he was striving. And so the Buddha now comes to the presence of those 5 ascetics. He wins their respect and their faith and their conviction. And then he starts to teach them. And that first exposition of the Dhamma is called the turning the wheel of the Dhamma, or setting in motion the unsurpassed wheel of the Dhamma. And it's said that when the Buddha set in motion the wheel of the Dhamma, on that occasion too, this measureless, glorious radiance became manifest in the world. So that is the 4th wonderful thing that takes place with the manifestation of the Buddha in the world. Okay, so those are the first four wonderful and amazing things that take place with the appearance of the Buddha in the world. So those are what is laid out in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, Sutta 127. But Sutta number 128 sets out another four wonderful and amazing things that take place with the manifestation of the Buddha in the world. And these four things are of quite a different nature from the previous four things. And as I said, it seems that the four things I just mentioned are primarily directed at people whose minds incline towards faith and devotion, and to enter the practice, enter the path because of their deep faith and devotion towards the Buddha. But it seems that these four things I'm going to mention here, are intended for those whose minds incline towards investigation and critical inquiry, and on that basis, establish conviction in the Buddha and in the Dharma. Okay, so what are these other four amazing things? So the Buddha says that people, and here I have to use a word same in Pali and Sanskrit, very difficult to translate into English. People delight in alaya. Take delight in alaya. Rejoice in alaya. So in my translation of Anguttara Nikaya, I translated alaya as attachment, but the word has several nuances. I would say that alaya is, on the one hand, it is the act of clinging. And on the other hand, it represents the objects of clinging, the things to which one clings, the things to which one clings with craving in order to find enjoyment, but also the things to which one clings to build up one's sense of personal identity. And so people say through their alaya, through their delight in alaya, they have to have, maybe show themselves going out in public wearing particular style of clothing, always to be at the top of fashion by going out in the most fashionable clothing. Or they have to go out in special cars. So you have to go out, you can't be satisfied with a Toyota or a Honda or an American-made car, a Ford or a Buick. But you have to have a Rolls Royce or a Jaguar or what are some of the other cars? A Ferrari. So that is their alaya. And people are attached to their accumulations of wealth. So you have millionaires and billionaires never satisfied with their accumulations of wealth, but always have to go on accumulating more and more wealth. Even though they'll never use that wealth, but just looking at the numbers in their bank accounts and their stock holdings fills them with joy and satisfaction, with delight. So people take delight in the objects of attachment in alaya. But the Buddha teaches the Dhamma for the sake of analaya, analaya, which means the ending of attachment, giving up the objects of attachment. And yet, it seems that that teaching of analaya, relinquishing the objects of attachment, that goes against the grain of the human mind. It goes against all of our inclinations, all of the habits that we've built up in this life, what our parents have been telling us. When you grow up, you want to be rich, you want to be famous, you want to be powerful. what society is telling us. Unless you're rich, unless you're famous, unless you're powerful, unless you have a good job, a nice home, a beautiful wife or husband, you're worthless. And yet when the Buddha teaches for analaya, people want to listen. They lend an ear. They're eager to hear these teachings. They set their minds on understanding it. They undertake the practice that leads to analaya, that leads to the giving up of clinging. And they realize the fruits of non-clinging. So that's the first wonderful and amazing thing that takes place with the manifestation of the Tathagata, the Buddha in the world. Okay, people, the second amazing and wonderful thing, people take delight in conceit. They are delighted with conceit. They rejoice in conceit. So the natural disposition of the mind is to be always inflating our ego, building up our ego, thinking, how can I be better than others? How can I be number one? So I want to be, if I'm a lay person, again, one has to be the wealthiest person in the world, or at least in the top 10, or at the minimum amongst, what is it, the Forbes 500? Is it 500 richest people in the world, or top 10 richest people in the world? Or if I have some skill, maybe in political administration, I start off by running maybe for a position in the city administration, state government. If I'm successful in state government, then I want to become maybe the governor. Once I become governor, then maybe I want to get into the Senate. If I'm in the Senate, then I want to become president. And I'm not saying that everybody who becomes president does so out of conceit, but there are a lot of people who run for president or who have those aspirations because they want to be number one in power and in status. And if you get into the academic world, then you have to become the foremost in scholarship. Whatever field of scholarship you go into, you have to write and publish a lot. And if you see another scholar in the same field is getting more famous, more respected than you are, you have to write articles criticizing his books and promoting your own point of view. And so you could see how conceit drives the human mind, even to the point of even nations and communities have their sense of conceit. It's not restricted to individuals. So one nation has to, dominate in the United Nations. So we have the permanent members of the Security Council in a way that is a manifestation of conceit. Somebody makes a suggestion, let's have rotation on the Security Council so that we're always changing the members. No nation has permanent status. But you think the United States, Great Britain, Russia, China are going to relinquish their positions on the Security Council? No, because they think we are the most important nations. And then there's conceit in races. In India, in caste status, the Brahmins think we are number one. In America, we have the problem white supremacy. In other countries have their own types of collective conceit. But the Buddha teaches the Dhamma for the removal of conceit, because all conceit revolves around one simple idea expressed by one letter of the English alphabet, the letter I, and the notion I am, and then the notion I am the best, or I am better than the others. And so that the Buddha teaches is that very notion, I am, is a delusion in itself. And so the task in following the Dhamma is to remove that conceit, to uproot the conceit by understanding that all the factors that we identify with, on which we build up our conceit, are just factors included within the 5 aggregates: bodily form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And all of those factors, the Buddha says, are not I, not mine, not myself. And so when the Buddha teaches the Dhamma for removing conceit, even though that goes against everything that I've devoted my life to building up the sense of I am, still people want to listen to it. They delight in that teaching of ending conceit. They set their minds on understanding it. They undertake the practice to remove the conceit I am. And when the practice comes to fulfillment, they obliterate the conceit I am and become utterly free from all notions of I am this or I am that. So that's the second wonderful and amazing thing that occurs with the manifestation of the Tathagata in the world. Okay, the third wonderful and amazing thing. Okay, it starts off by saying that people delight in excitement, take delight in excitement, rejoice in excitement. And if you want to see how true that is, the way I try to confirm this to myself is by going to one of these, excuse me, going to one of these free movie websites and seeing what are the most popular movies on the websites. And so the most popular types of movies, one class of what we call the thrillers. So these are movies that, of course, involve excitement revolving around maybe murder and violence and fighting and conflict. And then another popular type of movie, of course, the romance movies, the love stories, particularly when there's a lot of excitement, just not simple romance, but there has to be a villain who's going to try to steal the heroine away, and the hero has to launch out to overcome the villain and to win back his beloved one. Then another type of movie is sports movies, especially like, maybe that's another category. I'll come to that. Another type of popular movie, believe it or not, are the horror movies. It seems rather strange, but people like to be horrified, with movies about vampires and monsters and invasions from outer space. And then there are the movies, of course, comedies are very popular. Okay, so you could see from the movies, then another popular source of entertainment, sports events. So even with COVID, the COVID virus spreading around, once the sports stadiums open up to the general public, even though people are going to be taking the risk that they'll contract the virus and get seriously sick and put an end to their life, but once the sports stadiums open up, the seats get filled and people go on television to watch boxing and wrestling matches, and even baseball has become rather a bit boring because you have to watch, pitcher just throwing the ball, not much action taking place, but football, basketball, always action taking place. So movies, sports, then the concerts, the rock concerts, excuse me, I come from an earlier generation, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, who is now the popular ones, Taylor Swift, Justin, what's his name, Bieber? Yeah, anyway, you got the picture. So people delight in excitement, rejoice in excitement. And then one hears in one stadium, there's going to be a meditation retreat focusing on Anapanasati. Another stadium, there's going to be a wrestling match. Maybe the stadium in which there'll be the retreat focusing on mindfulness of breathing. Maybe it'll get a few hundred, if there's a popular teacher, a few hundred seats will be filled. The other stadium, the wrestling match, 50,000, 60,000 seats will be filled. Even the Dalai Lama, most popular Buddhist teacher, when he comes, if he's giving specific like Dharma teachings, maybe he'll get a few thousand audience, 2,000, 3,000. If it's a general lecture, maybe 10,000. But even you put the Dalai Lama against a boxing match, a heavyweight boxing match, and I'm afraid even the Dalai Lama is going to lose. Okay, but when the Tathagata appears on the scene, then he teaches the Dhamma that leads to upasama, to peace, to the calming down of excitement. And then people lend an ear, they set their minds to understanding, they take up the practice, they penetrate it, and realize that peace, the ending of excitement. So that is the third wonderful and amazing thing that takes place with the appearance of the Tathagata. And then the fourth wonderful and amazing thing is that people are immersed in ignorance, completely enveloped in ignorance. And maybe this seems like a strong thing to say, but I think when one looks at the extent to which, ignorance in itself as a negative, the negation of understanding, is rather difficult to detect. But when we look at the positive manifestation of ignorance, which is wrong views, we could see the extent to which ignorance has the grip over the human mind. So we could take even contemporary United States as an example of this. So we have scientists telling us, when you go out in public, wear masks. This was true like even last year when the pandemic here in the US was at its height. Always wear masks. But then people think somebody spreads the view or the idea that when you wear masks, you have a greater chance of catching the coronavirus. So it's dangerous to wear masks. And so you have a whole segment of people in the country refusing to wear masks. No, we're not going to wear masks. Even though the scientists like Dr. Anthony Fauci and other scientists, doctors are saying, going on television again and again, you should, if you want to preserve your life, to keep your loved ones safe, wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask. But they refuse to wear the mask. Again, the medical authorities say, observe social distancing, don't gather in large groups. But you see people gathering in large groups to protest and say, we want our freedom back. Open up, Wisconsin, open up Michigan, open up our states. Don't force us to live under this lockdown. Again, the grip of wrong views. And then somebody comes up with the idea of, bleach or injecting oneself with sunshine is a cure for the COVID virus, and propagates it over television. And you get even maybe several hundred people drinking bleach with the idea that they can cure the virus in that way, even though they get seriously ill and die. And then we see over the course of the 20th century, the destructive impact of wrong views. We had the rise of Nazism in Germany, fascism in Italy and Spain, communism in the Soviet Union, all of these wrong views resulting in the destruction and killing of millions of people in several world wars, a long Cold War. So this shows the extent of ignorance, how ignorance manifests in wrong views, and these wrong views just hold the entire human population captive. But the Buddha appears in the world for the purpose of removing ignorance, for obliterating even the subtlest wrong views and opening the minds of people to the liberating knowledge, the liberating wisdom. And so when the Buddha teaches the Dhamma for this purpose, people want to listen, they lend an ear, and they set their minds on understanding. So that's the fourth amazing and wonderful thing that takes place with the manifestation of the Tathagata in the world. Okay, so this is the second set of four wonderful and amazing things that occur with the appearance of the Tathagata in the world. That people set their minds on the removal of alaya, the removal of clinging and attachment. They set their minds on the removal of conceit. They set their minds on quieting down excitement and achieving peace. And they set their minds on removing ignorance and gaining true wisdom. And so I hope all of us on this Vesak season and through the rest of the year and years to come, we have the great fortune to be living during the time when the Buddha Dharma is available. So let us make the determination to set our own minds on the removal of clinging, the abolition of conceit, the gaining of peace, and the removal of ignorance by gaining wisdom. Okay, so maybe this should do for my basic talk, and maybe we have some time to take some questions. And I want to ask that the questions, please try to keep the questions relevant to the topic of the talk. Well, let's give preference to those questions before we take any other questions.
Thank you so much, Bhante. There are questions for both sides of your talk, and they are relevant. So if I could start with the first four. The first question is, why would a Buddha choose Jambudvipa? There's so much abdharma, corruption here. What's special about Jambudvipa?
It seems that in the Buddha's time, Jambudvipa, and for those who don't know, Jambudvipa is what now corresponds to the subcontinent of India. Probably it would include what's now called India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But, and I should, please forgive me, also include what is now called Nepal. Okay, so it seems that in the Buddha's time, that widespread corruption that maybe is now characteristic of India was not so characteristic of Jambudvipa. But also, it seems to me that the background, religious and philosophical environment or atmosphere of India provided the kind of soil in which the Buddha Dhamma could take place. So in ancient India, through the Vedic literature, the Upanishads and so forth, the Jainism, there were the teachings, at least in some form or another, of karma and rebirth. There was a tradition of renunciant ascetics who devoted their lives to contemplation. There would have been Brahminic ascetics who were familiar with the types of meditation methods that led to deep samadhi, who became some of the Buddha's first teachers, like Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. So that would have been the kind of conditions that provided appropriate soil for Buddha Dharma to arise. Whereas if the Buddha chose to take rebirth in China, for example, he wouldn't, even if he realized the teachings of karma and rebirth for himself, people would not have been able to understand and appreciate those teachings, even though they had a high ethical standard. But there was no background framework of understanding karma and rebirth.
Bhante, there's a follow-on question to that, which is, why does a Buddha have to be reborn in the human realm? Since he comes from a heavenly realm, can't he become a Buddha there? Why does he need to come to the human realm?
Yeah, he has to come to a human realm, I think, because the primary mission of the Buddha is, though it's said that the Buddha teaches and liberates both devas and human beings, but I think his primary target are human beings.
I see.
And also, I would say that there's suffering, or dukkha, pervades all the realms of existence, but it is more clearly evident in the human realm than in the deva realms. So the devas tend to be, because they have extremely long lifespans and abundance of pleasure, even of bliss. So if the Buddha is to realize the Dhamma and to teach the Four Noble Truths, if he speaks about impermanence and dukkha to the devas, maybe a few will understand, but most of them will think, we are living eternal lives and we have constant, uninterrupted bliss. So what are you talking about? But in the human realms, human beings can understand it more with greater facility than the devas. Though the devas, of course, when the Buddha starts teaching in the human realm, the devas also sort of listen in and then come to understand and also gain the paths and fruits.
So Bhante, on that point, it's unusual because it was the devas that persuaded the Buddha to teach. So that is there some coded message there? Unusual.
Yeah, I think that incident with Brahma coming down to the in front of the Bodhisattva to persuade him to teach, there are different levels at which one could understand that. And I don't know whether it should be understood very literally. It could also be understood as, because for me, it seems a little bit difficult to understand if the Buddha really followed the Bodhisattva career over so many lifetimes for the purpose of teaching the Dhamma, why should he have entertained the thought of remaining silent and just enjoying the peace himself? Why should it take somebody else to persuade him? So the way I see this as a kind of maybe rhetorical device or a literary device for emphasizing, on the one hand, the precious nature of the Dhamma, that it's very difficult to understand, very profound, and very rare to encounter. And on the other hand, it could have, again, as a literary device, could have been a means of trying to influence the people from the Brahmin caste by showing that even Mahabrahma, who the Brahmins worship, himself pays veneration to the Buddha and asks them to teach. So this is a kind of inducement to the Brahmins, especially when Brahma Sahampati says the Dhamma that has been prevailing in Magadha is an impure, imperfect Dhamma. So the implication is that the Dhamma of the Brahmins is imperfect and impure, right, whereas the Dhamma of the Buddha is pure and truly liberating.
Okay. The third question is about the Pacceka Buddhas. Are they the same as Arhants? If they're not, what is their purpose compared to Arhants?
Okay, the word Arhant, in sort of the technical sense, means one who is liberated, who has destroyed all the defilements and gained liberation from samsara, from birth and death. So the fully enlightened Buddha, or Sammasambuddha, the Pacceka Buddha, Pratyeka Buddha, and the disciples of the Buddha, the liberated disciples of the Buddha, are all arahants. But sometimes the word arahant is used in a narrower sense to refer to the liberated disciples. And in that case, we have the three groups: the arahant disciples, Pacceka Buddhas, and Sammasambuddhas, Samyaksam-Buddhas. So the difference, lies first in their range of knowledge, range of understanding, that the Sammasambuddha has, the one who has penetrated the Dhamma in its totality, who understands all the implications and ramifications of the Dhamma. And he has the special function of proclaiming the Dhamma in the world during this age of so-called spiritual darkness. The Pacceka Buddha, then I'll take the Arhat disciples. So these are people who encounter a Sammasambuddha, either in person or through the lineage of his teaching, learn the teaching and practice the teaching, and through their practice, they uproot all the defilements and gain liberation. And like a Buddha, they might teach to others and even guide others to enlightenment and liberation. But they don't realize the Dhamma for themselves. To achieve realization, they're dependent on learning the Dhamma that has been initiated by a Sammasambuddha. Now, the Pacceka Buddhas arise in periods when the teaching of a fully enlightened Buddha is not available. And they penetrate the truth of the Dhamma, and they gain liberation. They gain enlightenment and liberation. They understand many aspects of the Dhamma, but they haven't fulfilled the paramitas to the full extent necessary to be able to establish the Dhamma in the world the way a Sammasambuddha can. And so though they can teach individuals, but they can't establish what we call the sasana, that is the historical or communal manifestation of the Dhamma. They don't take on multitudes of disciples and set the wheel of Dhamma turning. So their teaching abilities are quite limited. Sometimes Pacceka Buddha is translated as silent Buddha, but that's not the case. They do teach others, but only in a very limited way.
Right. Thank you, Bhante. And then the third question is about the newborn baby, which sounds a bit unbelievable.
Yeah.
Is it a way to respect the special purpose of his arising? What's the metaphor here?
The metaphor?
Yes, of this baby walking like that, which is very physiologically unusual.
Yeah. I think maybe you could just see it as a kind of, again, as a literary device for highlighting the special nature of this being, or this baby who in the future is destined to become the fully enlightened Buddha.
Okay. And finally, there's a question about Mara and his defilements on the first four. Can someone manifesting himself, sometimes it's said that Mara is our own defilements, yet in the story, Mara is separate with troops and, so how is one understand this term Mara?
Yeah, based upon the canonical text, the commentaries enumerate, I think it's 3 or 4 aspects. I think there's 4 aspects of Mara. The word Mara, the idea of Mara is used in 4 senses in the text. Okay, one sense is called Kilesa Mara. This is Mara as the defilements. So in that sense, we could see Mara as just a personification of the mind's defilements. The second type of Mara is called the Kunda Mara, or Sanskrit Skanda Mara. So these are the 5 aggregates which are considered to be Mara, because these are the things to which we become attached, and the things on which we base our sense of personal identity, the sense of I am. So these are the aggregates is Mara. The third type of Mara is called Machu Mara or Marana Mara. This is Mara as death. So in this sense, we see Mara as a symbol for death, because as long as we have defilements, we remain within the domain of death. We continue on through the cycle of birth and death. And so we remain subject to Mara. So those are three metaphorical aspects of Mara. But then there's a fourth sense, which is the literal meaning of Mara. And that is Mara is a kind of malicious deity whose task is to keep us trapped within samsara. In a sense, sometimes Mara is, in this sense, is compared to the devil in the Christian tradition, but there's a big difference in that Mara has no connection at all with the hell realms. Mara doesn't try to tempt people to do evil deeds in order to lead them to hell. The function of Mara as the malicious deity is to keep aspirants for liberation trapped within the round of birth and death. And so Mara is content if we go on living comfortable lives as human beings, if we go on to the heavenly realms. Mara is perfectly happy with that. But when we turn our mind, let me try to break through the bonds of samsara and gain liberation, then Mara becomes disturbed. And then he starts sending his troops down. Even when for relative beginners, we could start to see these subordinate soldiers of Mara. For example, if I sit down to do meditation, I set my alarm, I'm going to sit for 50 minutes. Then after 15 minutes have gone by, the thought comes into my mind, hey, there's ice cream in the refrigerator. There's a good movie on the internet and it's going to be shown just tonight, just at this time. If I don't see it now, I'm going to miss it. So that's those little thoughts. It seems to be thoughts just arising from our own mind. But those thoughts, I would believe, are the little, not the big Mara, but the little children are planting those thoughts in our mind.
Okay, but sometimes it's called the divine son. Is that the same idea, that the Mara, is that a reference to Mara himself, the fourth Mara? The divine son, have you heard that?
No, I haven't heard that expression.
I don't. Maybe it's...
Oh, no, there's an expression, Deva Puta. Oh, I understand now, I think. Deva Puta. Yeah, I think the expression is Mara Deva Puta. It's not divine son, but it's a young Deva.
Yeah.
So Mara is depicted as sort of like a beautiful or a handsome young man who comes down. Particularly, Mara also serves the function. We see this in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, the discourses about bhikkhunis. He appears before some of the bhikkhunis, the nuns, when they're in secluded meditation. He appears as a handsome young man and he comes to them and says, why, you are a young woman in the prime of youth. What are you doing with your meditation here in the woods? Come, I'm a handsome young man. Give up your saffron robes, dress yourself in fine clothing, and let us sport and enjoy ourselves. Wow. Yeah, that's Deva, the young Deva. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. Then the final one on this section, I know that was it. Now we're going to go to the other section and talk about the other four. And the first one is the term Dharma Dhatu. Is this a term for all phenomena or just our mental field?
Or just what?
Or just our own mental field? it seems to have a sort of dual meaning. It's so strange.
Yeah, it's a term that takes on many different meanings in the Buddhist tradition. The way I'm using it, the way I use it when I say when I say that the Buddha penetrates the Dhammadhatu, then I'm using it in the sense of the totality of phenomena, or the totality of like all of the principles that are to be understood with wisdom through. So he would understand the different realms of existence and the different like classes of phenomena, like the 5 aggregates, the 12 sense bases, the 18 elements, the different classes of defilements, the different factors that are conducive to enlightenment. So all of those things are comprised within the Dhammadhatu.
When you said that the Buddha was able to, you know, see there was a riot going on in China or something, how did he do that? Was that in the Dhammadhatu as well, or
Was able to see what?
after his enlightenment, he could see what was going on in the world. He could see all the problems happening because of his view of the Dhammadhatu. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, I don't know that it would mean that he would be able to see every event that's going on. In fact, in the Buddhist tradition, in the Theravada tradition, when they speak about the Buddha as having omniscience, it doesn't mean that the Buddha knows every particular matter of fact. It doesn't mean that the Buddha in 2500 knew how to operate Microsoft Word. But it's said that the Buddha, that his knowledge is conditioned by his act of attention. So when the Buddha wants to know something, he turns his mind to it and then he knows it.
Okay.
And so the Buddha wouldn't turn his mind to things that are inconsequential.
Yes. Thank
How
you.
many squirrels there are in the woods around this monastery. That would not be relevant in any way. So he wouldn't know that.
And then there's a question here. How can the study of the Alar Vagina help us here, the storehouse consciousness?
Yeah, the Alaya Vijnana is a term that was used in the Chittamatra or Yogacara school to explain the ability of mind or consciousness to retain memory impressions, habit formations, and the karmic seeds through the change in manifest conscious activity and through the transition from life to life. In most of the other Buddha schools, even the non-Yogacara Mahayana schools, the consciousness is divided only into 6 classes and is held that it's simply through the process of conditionality that those impressions persist from life to life, through the course of our life and from life to life. But the Yogacara school posited a consciousness called the Alaya Vijnana, which I think they drew that term from the early Buddhist texts, which speak about alaya as clinging or the objects of clinging. So the image here is that consciousness sort of clings to the impressions of our actions and our habitual formations and preserves them in this deep level of consciousness.
Thank you, Bhante. And then finally, a question about the I. It says here, the notion of I or I am is so strong, so deeply ingrained. How can I be without an I? What are the practices that the Buddha recommended?
Yeah, in a way, we can never really be without an I, but what we have to do is sort of see through the illusion of I and the defilements, the mental dispositions that build up around the notion of I. And so, according to the structure of the Buddhist path, the complete uprooting of the conceit I am takes place only at the final stage of realization, the stage of arhatship. But the way that I find useful to prepare for this, even for a relative beginner, in meditation is to use, as part of one's regular practice, use the contemplation that can be done as a kind of recitation or reflection, going through the 5 aggregates, whatever physical form there is, bodily form. This is not mine, not I, not myself. Then one turns to feeling. Whatever feelings I experience, pleasant, painful, neutral, those are not mine, not I, not myself. Whatever ideas arise, that's within perception. Those ideas, even positions and views, are not mine, not I, not myself. Whatever intentions and purposes and motivations I have, those are not mine, not I, not myself. And then even my consciousness, my awareness is not mine, not I, not myself. And so when you reflect in this way, at the beginning, it seems a bit mechanical, but as one goes on over time, those modes of reflection gain more and more momentum or power until they gradually sort of weaken the notions of mine, I, and self, until one reaches the point where the reflection can give way to direct experiential insight into the truth of non-self.
Thank you, Bhante, very much. And thank you, Bhante, for a wonderful talk. I'm going to hand back to Wamo now. We've exactly hit 8 o'clock. Perfect. 1 hour and a half. Perfect, Bhante. So I will hand back to Wangmo to formally thank you. And for me, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, we are so blessed to hear the wise reflections on the Dhamma on this auspicious month of Vesak, especially for our Dharma brothers and sisters in India. We are thinking of you and this place, the seat of enlightenment, Bodh Gaya. If you have not had a chance to visit this incredible place, this incredible land, which we often call the motherland, where the roots all began, we hope that one day you will have such a chance to just bow our head to the Bodhi tree, where we can hear these such teachings on the wondrous manifestation of the Tathagata. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, expound on the
Can
Dhamma.
I end by sharing the merits, some verses for sharing the merits, and especially for sending the merits to the people of India in the hope that they'll enjoy, that they'll quickly recover from the coronavirus and enjoy a healthy environment. Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada soti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalam rakantu sabba devata sabba sanganubhavena sada soti bhavantu te.